be able to answer through my slides. So I would try to answer those questions as you guys sort of ask them aloud. And, let's have a very interactive session. I think that's the most productive way of doing something like this. Um, so I'm just going to share my screen with you. I'm going to share the presentation and I'm just going to run through a few slides, as I said earlier. Uh, Radhika, I hope the presentation is visible and I'm audible
Yes,
clearly.
yes, yes. You
Okay.
can be a little more louder if that's possible.
Okay. Okay. I will try and do
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
Uh, just let me check the volume of my laptop. I hope it's maximum. It is maximum. Okay. So, I'm sure all of you are already aware of what Incred is all about. So I'm not going to spend time on the legacy and the foundation, the base of Incred. I'm sure you guys are well aware. Punita Kumar Sinha is obviously the chairperson of the AMC, and she obviously is on, Blackstone, ex-Blackstone MD, and she's on the board of CFA Institute and many other companies in India, very well-known, renowned companies in India. She's a board member. Um, Straight diving into healthcare and what healthcare is all about, right? So let me discuss the various components of healthcare. Okay. Now, to my understanding, there are five components of the healthcare companies that we look at. Most of these companies do one, two, three, four, five businesses. And these are the various businesses, some of these or a combination of these that these companies engage in. Now, why is now the best time to invest in healthcare? That is purely because in each of these segments, as I walk you through them, in each of these segments, there is something changing for the better. More importantly, something which has not been there in the past 2, 3 decades. And therefore, the trajectory of healthcare companies in terms of their ROE, their earning growth, could be potentially something that has never existed earlier. And therefore, it's very, very important to understand the point that I want to make here. So the first business that these companies do is called the generics or the unbranded generic business. Now, first understand the fundamental of the business. The fundamental of the business is we Indian pharma companies create copycat of products that have gone off patent and we launch those products at lower prices than the innovator who had been selling that product when it was on patent. So if the innovator was selling the product for $100, we launched the product for $10, $20, $30. And that way we sort of inherit the market that was created by the innovator because he created the brand, he created the patient base. We are just giving the patient base an alternative to buy the product at a much cheaper price now that the patent has expired. Now, this segment is present mostly in developed nations. So this is an export market for us, and it is mostly developed. It is there in developed nations. So US, UK, many Western European countries, China, Japan. These are the markets which are purely unbranded generic markets for us. Now, what happens in this market is pretty simple. If a patient has fever, he goes to the doctor writes a prescription saying paracetamol. The patient goes to the pharmacy, says, doctor has given me paracetamol. The pharmacist will say, look, I have paracetamol manufactured by Sun Pharma, I have paracetamol manufactured by Dr. Reddy's. Mind you, there is no brand on the bottle or on the strip. There is absolutely no brand. So the bottle or the strip will just say paracetamol. There is no name other than paracetamol on the bottle or the strip. So the patient, therefore, in his head is buying paracetamol and he doesn't care or doesn't know who manufactures that paracetamol. So end of the day, whether it's manufactured by Sun Pharma or Dr. Reddy's or Teva or Sandoz, he doesn't care. Ultimately, most of the cases, patient ends up buying the product which is lowest priced because he's buying basically a commodity, right? With no branding, no differentiation. And if you're buying a commodity, like us Indians, most of the foreign counterparts as well, they go for the lowest price product. Therefore, this market becomes a race to the bottom market. Whoever can price the product lowest can sell the most volume, and whoever sells at the lowest price will make the lowest margin, right? Broadly speaking. So, therefore, this is a market where to make margins is very difficult, to make a decent return on equity is very difficult. And you need to have a very good product basket. You need to have very good focus on cost to be able to do well on this market. Now, historically, 2009 to 15, US was a great market for Indian companies. Now, any commodity market, if you think about, right? Any commodity market, if you think about, what determines price? Demand and supply, right? Now, demand in pharma actually is pretty non-discretionary, right? So it's basically a given number. You cannot change that number. You cannot increase the incidence of diseases. You cannot decrease the incidence of diseases. They are what they are. And therefore, whoever is ill will take a product, right? He will not buy 5 tablets if he have to consume only 1 tablet. If he has more money, he's not going to buy 10 tablets, even though he needs only one. Similarly, if he has less money, he's not going to buy half a tablet. If he needs 1 tablet, he's going to buy 1 tablet. So you cannot manipulate demand in pharma. It's pretty non-discretionary in nature. So what changes in pharma and what determines pricing in this commodity market in pharma, in unbranded generic market, is the supply, purely the supply. So if supply goes up, price comes down. If supply goes down, price goes up. It's a very simple linear economic equation. Okay. Now, why pharma companies made such a huge amount of money in US from 2009 to 15? Why were they so immensely profitable? Because the supply in the US market for generics was low. There were very few people selling generics in the US market. Now, because the supply was low, you were able to command a premium on your price because you were one of the few suppliers who are selling a product, and there are many buyers who want that product. So you're able to sell the product at better and better prices every time. Now, you were able to, pharma companies were able to do that from 2009 to 15 consistently. But in 2015, these pharma companies became so immensely profitable in US or the unbranded market that they were actually making 20-25% return on equity on the US business. Now, in any commodity business, if you make that sort of ROE, right, what happens next? You attract competitors. You attract a ton of competitors because it's a commodity market. There is no barrier of entry. No, if you can make 20% return on equity, I will also get attracted and get to the same business. And again, I also want to make that 20% return on equity. Am I right? So if that is the situation, then what happened from 2015 to 19 is exactly that. A lot of competitors entered the market. When the competitors entered the market, what happened to supply? Supply went up. When supply went up, what happened to prices? Prices went down. When prices went down, what happened to return on equity? It went down, down, down. So pharma companies were doing 10% return on equity in 2009. They peaked at 24% return on equity in 2015. And by 2019, 2020 beginning, they had touched 8% return on equity. And this was all pricing driven in the US unbranded market. Okay. So why did we launch the DSP Healthcare Fund in 2018 end or 2019 beginning when we launched it? Because we saw that the ROE was bottoming out at 8 to 9%. Remember, pharma companies in India are the most cost competitive players. We are the cheapest producers of these generics globally. Even China imports from us. Even they don't compete with us. So therefore, if we are not profitable or if we are very suboptimally profitable, then our competitors who are in US, Europe, China, Hungary, they are definitely not making any money because their cost is higher than us and their selling price has to be the same because it's a commodity market. You cannot charge a different price. You have to sell at the same price. If you're selling at the same price and your cost structure is higher and we are barely profitable, you are definitely making a loss, right? And if you're making a loss, you cannot sustain those losses forever. So what starts happening after that? What started happening in 2020? We saw 4 or 5 pharma companies in US filing for bankruptcy because they cannot sustain operations at the current price points. Teva, which is the largest generic pharma company based out of US, has announced that they're going to shut down about 30 manufacturing plants, lay off about 5,000 laborers just to save cost. Now, when bankruptcies happen, plant shutdowns happen, what happens to supply next? Supply starts to go down. When supply starts to go down, what happens to prices next? They stop declining first. First, they stop declining. Then they slowly start going up as well if supply further shrinks. Today, we are at a juncture where the prices have just stopped declining. They were declining at 10, 15% in 17, 18, 19, years 2017, 18, 19. They were declining at 10, 15% range. The average decline before that used to be 2, 3%. Right now, we are broadly at a level where the decline is between 0 and 3%. Okay. So the prices have almost stopped declining. Now, as the supply continues to shrink, your pricing will also start to improve. When your pricing starts to improve, your ROE will start to improve. So this is something about the US market. But look, I told you that there is something else happening which has never happened before. So US market goes through pricing cycles. We have seen a couple of pricing cycles. This is the third pricing cycle. So it's fine. So we understand the pricing cycle. But China. So China is the second largest global market in the world. $500 billion market size for US, $150 billion market size for China. But China, $150 billion market, has always been close to Indian players. They've always been close to India. They have always encouraged domestic pharma companies in China to take market share, and they have always discouraged Indian pharma companies from selling their products in China. 6 to 12 months earlier, China actually put out a notification saying they are inviting Indian pharma companies to come and sell their products in China. Why did they do that? They took 2 decades to realize that their domestic pharma companies just aren't strong enough to capture their domestic market. So just to give you some history, in 1980s, before Sun Pharma, Lupin, Dr. Reddy's were born, they're all late 1980s born. So early 1980s, in Indian market, 85% market share, or in fact 90% market share, used to belong to multinational pharma companies. Your Glaxo, Pfizer, Sanofi, Novartis, they were the big players in India. They used to have 90% market share all put together. And the older Indian players, the Exipla, Alembic and all, the Torrent and all, they used to have 10% market share. Today, as we speak, Indian pharma companies in India have 90% market share. And only 10% market share is with MNCs. So the MNCs have lost 80% market share over the last 4 decades in India. So Indian companies are that competent. But in China today, MNCs still command 85% market share. That's because China's local pharmaceutical industry has just failed to challenge the MNCs. They've just not been able to compete because the cost isn't the same, the competition isn't the same. And these MNCs, when they sell drugs at a very high price point. So the healthcare bill is very large for China. It's a $150 billion market. India is a $20 billion market. China is a $150 billion market, 7 times the size. The population difference isn't much anymore, but the market size is still 7.5 times. So China is tired of paying this high healthcare bill, and which is why they want cheaper alternatives, which is why this invitation, this red carpet for the Indian pharma industry. Now, this segment, when it comes through, just imagine, it is just another venue for growth. There is no incremental cost for Indian companies to selling to China. Na? We already have plants, we already have products, we already have capacities. All we have to do is manufacture and sell to China also, while we are selling to US already or Europe already. So this is something which has changed. This was not there earlier with us. The second segment that these companies operate in is the branded generic segment. So this is the best example of a branded generic market is India. Broadly, many emerging markets are branded generic markets, including Brazil, Argentina, Russia, CIS, Philippines, Vietnam, so on and so forth. But India is by far the most significant branded generic market. Now, the big difference between the earlier segment, which is the unbranded generic segment, and the branded generic segment, which is India, is that in India, in these markets, you're allowed to brand your products. So when I'm selling paracetamol, I can put a brand on it. I can call it Crocin, I can call it Calpol, I can call it Dolo, I can call it Tupipara, I can call it what I want. And then what happens is, if a patient goes to the doctor, he has fever, the doctor gives him a prescription saying Crocin. The patient goes to the pharmacy, he's not buying paracetamol, he's buying Crocin. He has to buy that brand that the doctor prescribed. And let's say 1 year later, the patient again has fever. He may not even go to the doctor. He may just go to the pharmacy and again buy Crocin because last time that worked for him. And therefore, what this creates is brand loyalty, brand equity. And the brand equity, brand loyalty basically empowers the pharma company to make good margins. So all pharma companies in India who sell their products in India behave like FMCG companies. They barely manufacture anything that they sell. They basically procure everything from third-party manufacturers. They brand the product and they promote the product. So they're branding companies. They are companies that create branding for the patients and for the doctors, and they sell their products basis of brands. They don't sell their products on the basis of cost or price. So for instance, in US, if there is a paracetamol tablet available for 10 cents and a new player launches it at 5 cents, the very next day, the older players who are selling it at 10 cents have to sell it at 5 cents. They can no longer sell it at 10 cents because there's somebody willing to sell at 5 cents. Whereas in India, if Crocin sells for 50 rupees a strip, even if Dolo sells for 20 rupees a strip, Crocin will continue to sell for 50 rupees a strip. That's the power of a brand. No? It protects your price, it protects your market share. So this is an immensely profitable business, immensely profitable. ROEs range from 40 to 80% company to company. There is literally no reinvestment required because you don't own your own capacities. You get everything third-party manufactured. You don't need reinvestment. Working capital is very tight because you own the brand, you command the channel. So you have the control of working capital. So it's a very, very free cash flow throwing business as well, immensely profitable. Now, this business is very akin to the FMCG business that we witness, right? Somebody who takes Crocin every time. Somebody who uses Dove soap will use Dove soap every time, right? That's just the sort of the analogy that you should think of. Whereas on the unbranded side, it is more like a steel market. One day you can buy it from SAIL, the other day you can buy from Tata Steel, third day you can buy from JSW. Just depends on who's giving you a better quotation. Am I right? Now, in the branded generic segment, what is changing for Indian companies? What is something which is new? So historically, for Indian pharma companies, the Indian market has been a market which has gotten the income distribution as polarized, right? So the rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer, right? So historically, the pharma market has been largely limited to the richer class, which is basically your middle class plus your upper middle class plus your rich class, the uber rich class, right? And they are the total market. The poor who got poorer, the farmers, the villages, pharmaceutical products have never reached those guys. Why have they never reached? Because affordability nahi. They can't afford, right? Now, if you cannot afford pharmaceutical products, you cannot buy them. What is changing therefore now is the Indian government's plan of doing this Ayushman Bharat, which is government insurance, public insurance, where they're saying that we will give 10 crore families, which is 45 crore individuals, insurance up to 5 lakh rupees. Now, uh, today the rich class and the middle class and the upper middle class all put together must be about 15, 20 crore individuals who are able to afford healthcare. Now, because of insurance, there will be an additional 40, 45 crore people who will be able to afford healthcare. Now, this is a government program. I understand it can take 5 years, 10 years to get implemented. Let's say it takes 10 years to get implemented. Even if in 10 years, the addressable population for pharma companies grows from 15, 20 crores to 50, 60 crores, you can imagine the kind of volume growth that can come in the next 10 years for these pharma companies. This is something we never had historically. This 8-10% growth that we have done historically has come on the base of this rich and middle class, which is still giving you that 8-10% growth. This poor class was never giving you any growth. Now suddenly this poor class will start contributing to pharma companies' earnings, right? So this is totally a new pocket which has emerged because of the government insurance. The third bucket being API or raw material manufacturing for pharma. The best way to understand API is raw material. So API is the raw material which goes into the medication that we finally consume. Now API business historically for Indian companies has been a very bad business. Why has it been a bad business? In 1980s, again taking you to the history, in 1980s, India used to be the world leader in API production. We used to supply API to everybody in the world, right? What changed after that? China. China came in with huge industrial parks in API. Most importantly, China said in those industrial parks, these API companies or chemical companies were allowed to pollute as much as they wanted. There was no pollution control. Whereas in India, we have always had pollution control. Now, pollution control itself is about 20% of the cost of an API. If you have pollution control, your API cost will be 20% higher because pollution control costs a lot of money, costs a lot of power, costs a lot of infrastructure. China didn't have that cost, and we Indians had that cost. So therefore, China turned out to be a cheaper producer. And from 1980 to 2020, China basically took away our entire market share. We have very little market share left now. They took away a lion's share of our market share. So China became very big in API, and Indian companies are happy to let China become a big API producer because we were anyways buying from China ourselves to save some pennies. So we were doing that, and that was okay. That was running fine. So this was historically a very bad business. What has changed here now? Two things have changed. Number one, in China now, pollution norms have been implemented because of the Paris Climate Treaty and very other international treaties for pollution control, carbon control, global warming. China has had to implement pollution control. Now, when they're implementing pollution control, their cost of manufacturing is going up. Ours was already up. Their cost of manufacturing is now going up because of implementing pollution control. So that cost arbitrage, which was about 30-35% between India and China, 20-25% of the cost arbitrage is getting bridged because they are implementing pollution control. Add to that, China standard of living is going up. Now, when standard of living goes up, your wage cost goes up, right? China standard of living is going up it is growing much faster than the Indian standard of living. So the wage cost is growing much faster than Indian wage cost. So that cost arbitrage is further narrowing. So I am given to understand by pharma companies that the cost arbitrage, which used to be as high as 25-30%, has now come down to 2 to 5% between China and India, all factors considered. So that is one thing that China has done. The cost has gone up, and therefore the price has gone up, and therefore the Indian companies have become more competent with pharma, with Chinese companies when it comes to API production. The second thing which has changed here is the customer mindset. So earlier, customers were very happy to buy all of their requirement from China to save a few pennies. Right? Now, China in the last 3 years have defaulted twice in supplying material to their customer. One, when they implemented pollution norms, because when you implement pollution norms, you have to shut down capacity, you have to add that infrastructure, rerun validation batches, rerun your processes, and then you can again supply. So there's a good 6 to 12 month holiday there. And in that 6 to 12 months, you can't supply anything to your customer. Your customer gets really impacted adversely when you can't supply them the raw material. So China had defaulted supplying once back then. Secondly, they've defaulted during COVID. So Wuhan, which is where the COVID virus generated, is incidentally also the API manufacturing hub of China. So when the coronavirus broke out in Wuhan, the first thing it impacted was API manufacturing, because that is the epicenter of API manufacturing in China. So that also severely got impacted. So the customers are now very, very unhappy with China as a geography. And they have realized that they need to de-risk their supply chain. They cannot depend on one geography to get their entire raw material. Correct. So now the second geography automatically that they tend to look at is India. So because of this, so if a customer was earlier buying 100 tons from China, he'll continue to buy some. He may buy 50 tons, he may buy 70 tons, he may buy 90 tons from China, but the balance 10, 20, 30, 50 tons he'll buy from India now, just to de-risk his supply chain, just to ensure that he doesn't run out of raw material ever. If something goes wrong in China or something goes wrong in India, he gets supply from the other vendor. So because of this, now Indian companies are getting a lot of demand for their products, a lot of demand. Now China exports API worth $30 odd billion. India exports API worth $4 billion. Even if China loses as much as 10-15% of their market share and India gains that, India's market share can double. Simple mathematics. Correct. So this is a huge tailwind. An example of this tailwind is Divi's Labs, a very well-known pharma company, the largest API manufacturer in India. If you look at their 2019 balance sheet, for the 35 years of their existence, they had totally spent 2,500 crores in creating capacity for 35 years put together. In 2020 and 21, 2 years alone, they're going to spend another 2,500 crores to create capacity. So they are going to create as much capacity in 2 years as it has created in last 35 years put together. This is the kind of demand that these API companies are witnessing, and this has been never ever before the case. Okay, so things are changing for far better even in this segment of the pharma companies. Hospitals. So hospitals are obviously a beneficiary of the Ayushman Bharat program that I spoke of. Again, that program had never existed earlier. So there is a new pocket of growth for hospitals coming. The other thing which is happening in hospitals is, so hospitals is a very interesting business. It's a business where your older existing capacity is extremely profitable. It gives you a lot of profit, a lot of cash flow. But your new capacities that you launch gives you losses for 2-3 years before it becomes profitable, right? Now, many of these hospital chains, that we know of, they created a lot of bed capacity over the last 3-4 years. And therefore, they were getting a lot of new losses from these new capacities. Now, what they have done is they've all decided that, look, let us stop the CapEx program. The CapEx cycle is ended. So we will not do CapEx for the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And if they don't do CapEx for 3, 4, 5 years, what happens next is you don't get any incremental new losses because you're not launching any new capacities. Your existing losses from the existing new capacity turns to profit slowly as time passes. And your older beds are always profitable as they were. They keep growing in profitability. So all put together, your overall profit, return on equity, everything starts looking better and better. Now, when it starts looking better and better and you make more and more cash flow because you're not spending as much in CapEx, your debt also goes down. And when all of these things happen, your stock obviously re-rates and your earning growth is, super normal, and, you make a lot of money. So I'm very optimistic about hospitals going forward. The last segment I want to discuss is diagnostics. So in diagnostics, 85% of the Indian diagnostic market is unorganized, mom and pop diagnostic stores. Okay. 15% is organized, which is your Metropolis, your SRL, your, Dr. Lal, Midol, Suburban Diagnostics, these chains. Now, the market itself is growing at 10-12%. And earlier, 5-6 years earlier, Indian patients never used to care which diagnostic lab they're going to, whether it be a Sunflower diagnostic or a Purnima diagnostic, they never cared. If doctor said go to that diagnostic, they used to go to that diagnostic. In the last 4-5 years, the diagnostic companies have spent so much money in branding, that they have created this brand image in the head of the consumers. And now the average Indian consumer is becoming aspirational. He wants to go to a good brand. If he has to go to a diagnostic lab, he wants to go to a good diagnostic lab where he can be satisfied with the service. He can be satisfied with the output of the, test. And therefore, what we are noticing is that more and more Indians are now choosing, more and more Indians are now choosing these, organized chains over the unorganized chains. And therefore, the organized sector is growing faster than the unorganized sector in diagnostics. So when the sector itself is growing at 10-12%, organized chains are growing at 15-18%, and the unorganized, mind you, are still growing at 6-7%. So this is a sector where, you can take a 30-40 year call, because the addressable market is so huge and the current market share is so low that these organized chains will continue to gain market share for a very, very long time. So these are the 5 segments that Indian companies engage in. Now I want to talk about pharma for 1 minute. Not 1 minute, maybe this slide will take 10 minutes. But I want to be very clear. So when we look at Reliance Industries or companies like Piramal Enterprises, we understand that these are companies which are conglomerates. They do 2-3 very different businesses, and you cannot sort of value the company in one breath. You have to value the parts of the company separately and add the parts ka value to arrive at the total value of the company. But when we think of Sun Pharma, Dr. Reddy's, Cipla, does a similar thought come into our head? The answer is no. And that is where I think we are wrong. That is where the opportunity to make a lot of money lies for an average investor. And I'll explain that opportunity to you right now. So let's say an average Indian company, I'm taking an example here. So hypothetical example. So let's say this Indian company, this is a number they report where they do 100 rupees of revenue, 22 rupees of EBITDA, almost 9.5 rupee of PAT or EPS on a 100 rupee capital employed. So return on equity is almost 10%, right? Now, this is what the pharma company reports. Now, an average Joe, when he looks at these numbers, he says, okay, so this is a 10% on equity business, not a great business, decent business. Let me value it at 20 times P multiple. If I value this company at 20 times 9.5, which is his reported profit, I get 190 rupees stock price, right? Now, you have to go a layer deeper to understand where the arbitrage lies. So I went a few layers deeper. I realized that out of this 100 rupees of revenue, most of these companies make, let's say, 30 rupees in India. And in this 30 rupees of revenue that they make in India, the EBITDA they end up making is about 12 rupees. Very, very profitable, as I said earlier. There is no depreciation because you don't have your own plant. There is a huge amount of interest income. There's a lot of cash which gets generated, and there is no way to deploy that cash. So there is an interest income. And end of the day, you end up making almost 11.5 rupee profit after tax on the India business, where you just do 30 rupees of top line. And the capital employed in this business is extremely low. It's 25 rupees because again, there is no fixed asset. So your ROE is actually very, very good, 45, 46% ROE. So this is your FMCG type business, right? With high ROE, high profitability, no reinvestment, consistent growth, right? So this is the India business. The US business, the unbranded business, there we do more revenue. We do higher revenue in that segment because the market is bigger. But look at the profitability, significantly poorer. It's only 10% EBITDA margin. Add to that, there is a very high depreciation number. Why? Because we are manufacturers in this business. We are not branding companies in this business. So we have our own plants, and that too very sophisticated, large scale plants because of USFD and all that. So we have very high depreciation number. Most of these pharma companies have taken debt for acquisition or for creating capacity. So there is an interest cost involved as well. Net, many of these pharma companies actually make a loss in the US business on an accounting basis, on a capital employed of almost 50 rupees, very, very high capital employed. Why? Because your assets are your own, your manufacturing assets are your own. So your gross block is very high and your working capital is obviously higher because in this case, channel commands you. You don't command the channel. You are an undifferentiated producer. So you have no say in front of the channel. The channel tells you, I'll give you money later, don't even come to me. And you have to agree to that. So you make a very low ROE, in fact, negative ROE in most cases in this particular business. The third business, which is the API rest of the world business, is basically an average steady business. It is not as good as the Indian business, not as bad as the US business, somewhere in between. 20 rupees of top line, 25% odd EBITDA, and about 15-16% return on equity. Now, when the average Joe was valuing this company at 20 times 9.5 and valuing this company at 190 rupees, what he is effectively doing is he's valuing the India business at 20 times 11.5, valuing the US business 20 times -6, and valuing the ROW business 20 times 4. ROW stands for rest of the world. So 20 times 4, okay? Now the problem lies in this, the arbitrage, the mathematical arbitrage lies in this. When you give 20 times multiple to -6 or this loss in the US business, what you're effectively mathematically saying is that for the next 20 years, US business will continue to be a loss-making business. And not only will it make losses, the losses will actually keep growing year after year after year. That is what the multiple implies, no? Correct? That is what the mathematically the multiple implies. Now, that assumption is never going to be realistic. It is always going to be wrong. Always, always, always going to be wrong. Because no businessman in his right mind will do a business which for next 20 years will give him a loss and the loss will keep growing, no? Anybody does a business to make profit, no? So no businessman will ever do this business sustainably. So therefore, what is the option for a businessman where this is happening currently in one of his verticals? There are only two options. Either you convert this -6 to +6, somehow, do whatever you want, reduce cost, increase product basket, increase prices, do what you have to, but make this -6 +6. Just imagine if a businessman is able to make this -6 to +6, his overall profit will go up from 9.5 to 21.5, no? His ROE will go up from 10% to 21%, no? Correct? -6 to +6 is a 12 rupee delta, right? And just imagine that what the stock price will look like, right? But I'm saying that is an optimistic assumption to make. Let's not be optimistic here. We are investors. We always should work with conservative assumptions, right? So let's not make the optimistic assumption that the businessman will be able to convert this -6 to +6. Let's work with the more pessimistic assumption that the businessman will never be able to make profitable and therefore will be forced to shut down the business, write off the business. So the table below, all I've done is I've taken the same numbers as above, but I've just removed the US business, assuming that it is shelved, it is written off, it is completely scrapped. Okay. Now look at how the yellow column changes from above to below. The 100 rupee of revenue goes down to 50 because your US business is shut. You don't do it anymore. Your EBITDA falls from 22 to 17. But look, your PAT, it will grow from 9.5 to 15.5. More importantly, capital employed from 100 goes to 50. And therefore, return on equity from 10 goes to 31%. Right? Now, if I give an average Joe these numbers and say value this company for me, he's not going to value this company anything less than 25 times. So if he values this company 25 times 15.5, you get a value of 387 rupees, no, which is more than 100% upside of your previous valuation. So just by not committing a mathematical crime of giving the loss a multiple, I can see significant upsides in many, many stocks where currently this business creates a loss. Lastly, many people ask the question of pharma has run up in the last 12 months and what healthcare has run up in the last 12 months. Is it time to book profits? Is it time to deploy more? Is it time to hold on to what I've deployed? So very simple answer I'll give you. Don't look at absolute stock prices. I'll give you an example. There's a very well-known stock, Sun Pharma, used to be 1,200 rupees in 2015 per share. Today, it fell down all the way to 300 rupees. Today, it's 600 rupees. So when you're thinking, your mind plays a mathematical trick on you. When you're thinking, your mind tells you Sun Pharma fell from 1,200 to 300. So price correction is 75%. Now it has gone up from 300 to 600. So price appreciation is 100%. So 75 correction followed by 100 appreciation. What you fail to understand is your stock price is still 50% down from what it was. Correct? So that's a mathematical illusion. So therefore, don't think on absolute terms. Don't go by recency bias. Recency bias is a poison for wealth creation. Don't ever, think about recent trends and try to play on recent trends. It will more often than not fail you. Okay. So what I've done here is to remove the recency bias. I've taken a 12-year trajectory. Okay. As much data is available in Bloomberg. There's a 12-year data available in Bloomberg. I've taken entire 12 years. And this red line depicts the premium or the premium that the healthcare sector commands on the broader market in terms of EV/EBITDA multiple. So to begin with, in 2009, this premium was 20%. As the ROE went up for the sector up to 2015, the premium went up from 20% to 100%. And as the ROE started to decline, the premium also declined from 100% to 0%, bottoming out in December 19. After the rally that started from December 19, we have just now come back to the average of 31% premium. The average, actually 12-year average is 35% premium. We are currently at 31% premium. So we are just below the average. Despite the recent rally in the sector. Okay. So multiple I just discussed with you, and multiple is just one part of the equation, right? What is the second part of the equation? It is earnings, right? What is the best barometer of earnings? Return on equity. So look at the return on equity chart. Return on equity used to be 11%. We topped at 24% in 2015. We went all the way down to 8% in late 2019, early 2020. And from there, we have just recovered to 9.5%. 10%, roughly just recovered. Average is 14, 15%, peak is 24. So we are nowhere close to the average. We are nowhere close to the peak. We have just recovered from the bottom. Why is this recovery happening? Because of the factors we spoke of earlier. US pricing is improving, India business growth is accelerating, and then your, Ayushman Bharat is helping, API, the business is coming into pharma companies. All these factors are contributing to this recovery, right? And this recovery isn't done. We have just begun, right? We've not even reached the average, 12-year average. We'll probably go up to the peak because there are drivers this time which drivers never existed. In 2015, these drivers weren't there, right? So when a sector continues to improve in ROE, the multiple can either stay where it is or it can re-rate. I have never in my investment journey of 15 years seen that multiples de-rate while the ROE is improving. That generally never happens. So therefore, I'm very comfortable that if we deploy a portfolio today, which is why we bought this portfolio to Incred, which is why I joined Incred. I wanted to take this portfolio to all of you guys and say that, look, this portfolio can give you returns which is equal to growth in earnings for the components of the portfolio. Add to that, there is a possibility that you get a multiple re-rating. I cannot guide you to a multiple re-rating because these are factors which are beyond anyone's control or anybody's foresight. But I can definitely tell you that the portfolio return will be more or less broadly equal to the earning growth we will see in the portfolio. And in my view, the earning growth in the portfolio that we have created will be around mid-teen level to high teen. Mid-teen to high teen is what I believe we will do going forward in terms of earning growth. I'll show you a couple more slides and then I'm more than happy to take questions. Um, this is a product that I managed, and I want to spend just 1 minute on this slide because the questions will come on this. So we launched the DSP Healthcare Fund in November 18. We got only 140 crores on the NFO. Recency bias. We went to every person we could reach out to. We told them all that ROEs have bottomed out, multiples are at 0% premium to broader market. Please give us money. You will enjoy what happens next. Nobody gave us money. Very few people chose to give us money. From November 18 to November 19, DSP Healthcare Fund return was about -5, -6%. 12 months after launch, the product's return was -5, -6%. From November 19 to September 20, when I last managed the product created a return of 82%. It was the best performing mutual fund in India in 2020, period, regardless of sectoral or non-sectoral or healthcare or non-healthcare, doesn't matter. In fact, it was the best performing investment product. It outperformed all the PMS and AIFs as well. So 74% return net, point to point. What is a matter of pride for me is not that my product was the best return generating product. That is a very good thing to have. A matter of pride for me at least is to see that my product was the best generating product while the risk in the product was the lowest. Look at the Sharpe ratios, look at the standard deviation. It is the lowest in class. This is arbitrage. This is inefficient market. If you are able to generate higher returns by assuming lower return, by assuming lower risk, if you are able to generate higher returns by assuming lower risk, that is indicative of arbitrage, inefficient markets. And that is exactly what I alluded to. Small and mid-cap pharma companies, let me give you an example of that arbitrage. So two companies I will take an example of, Sun Pharma and Ipca Laboratories. I have pegged their stock price at 100 rupees in 2016. From there, that 100 rupees has come down to 70 for Sun Pharma, and Ipca 100 rupees has gone up to 400. Now, this goes against the rhetoric which every other fund manager is marketing to you, right? Large is good, large is great, large is invincible, invest in large companies, wealth will compound. Doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work because, not in pharma at least, because a large part of these large pharma companies, a large part of their cash flow comes from the commodity business, which is the US unbranded business. Whereas a large part of these smaller pharma companies, the IPCAs of the world, their cash flow comes from the branded generic business, which is the FMCG type business, which is the sticky business, which is the sustainable business, where branding protects you. Okay. Now this is stock price. Look at the fundamental numbers. Revenue CAGR for a Sun Pharma over these 5 years was 4%. IPCA was 12. EBITDA CAGR for Sun Pharma was -4. IPCA was +30. Sun Pharma PAT CAGR was -5. IPCA was +60. Sun Pharma ROE used to be 17, has come down to 9. IPCA was 4, has gone up to 18. So please don't follow the rhetoric of investing. Even if you're bullish on healthcare or you're bullish on pharma, don't invest in funds or don't invest in benchmarks or don't invest in places where you feel they're buying all large caps. So large cap is good quality, large is great, large is safe. Kabhi nahi hoga. It will not work. It will not work. So yeah, I think that's broadly what I wanted to discuss with you guys. I have a bunch of other slides which I'm sure I'll need to sort of discuss with you guys, once we take Q&A. But why don't we open for Q&A now, Radhika? Is that a good idea?
Yes. I have already asked. So request all of you to please use the chat box at the bottom to just post your questions so that we can take them one at a time. And I think in the meanwhile, maybe I can open with a question, Aditya, for you. As someone from a marketing background, so just talking about brands, right? So you've always said that branding is very important in pharma in India because we recognize them as Crocin and Wix and etc. So who plays this major part of building the brand? Is it just the doctors and the medical fraternity, or are there options even openly available for each player to market it, or above the line, below the line, as the case may be?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are two channels basically. One is you can reach out directly to the consumer. So, but there is only a very few products where you can reach out to the consumer, legally speaking. Let's say these OTC products like multivitamins and some of these healthcare products like contraceptives, etc. You can reach out directly to the customer. So in those cases, you have seen those ads, right? Revital ads and Volini ads, and so you can create brand by reaching out direct to the customer, but you can do that only for a select group of products. The most important channel is actually the doctor channel, because your MR goes to the doctor, he details the product. So Radhika, very interestingly, my first job was Glenmark in 2005, and I joined Glenmark as a management trainee. uh, Glenmark has this fantastic 3-month training program where no matter which area you are going to work into, be it finance, marketing, operations, IT, you have to, for the first 3 months, travel door to door of doctors with an MR to see how the product is sold. And that experience of 2005, those 3 months in 2005, and an average MR, Radhika, works for 12 hours. Out of these 12 hours, 11 hours, 55 minutes, he is just traveling and waiting. Only 5 minutes of those 12 hours is actually detailing the product to the doctor, because the doctor will make him wait for 2 hours and then give him 30 seconds or 1 minute to detail the product, right? So that actually told me how important that is. Why does the pharma company pay this MR for 12 hours when he actually works only for 5 minutes? Because once that MR goes to the doctor's step and he spends those 30, 45 seconds listening to those brands, he's hammering those brands in the doctor's head. The doctor's pen cannot control itself. It automatically goes to the brand which the doctor has heard the most number of times. And that is how the branding basically comes in this business.
I think Dolo 650, I never heard of it growing up, but now it's like a common name, and that's probably because the doctors talk about it.
Exactly.
So we have a first question here. First question is, what will be the composition of the portfolio market cap wise? Market cap wise.
Market cap wise. So the weighted average market cap of the portfolio is about 20,000 crores. So we will have about 30 odd percent in large caps, and the balance will be spread across small and mid caps. And mind you, the other alternatives in pharma that you have, they have it exactly inverse. They have 70-80% in large caps and 20-30% in mid caps.
An interesting question. If the dollar has a long-term downtrend, or the American companies, then is it possible that MNC pharma companies come back for buybacks? They come to India. I'm assuming that that's what he means. Like,
no, they can't, because most of the MNC pharma companies already have 75% stake in their Indian subsidiary. And as per SEBI norms, they cannot breach that 75% stake. So they cannot buy back any of the Indian pharma stock, their MNC stock, if that was the question.
Next question is, post-COVID scenario, how do you see telehealth product growth, and is that organized yet?
Telehealth, you asked. Yeah. Telemedicine. So telemedicine is very interesting. I think it is slightly an emerging area in India. And telemedicine obviously will do well because people have realized that they don't really need to visit the doctor physically sometimes. Sometimes you need to, sometimes you may not physically visit the doctor, and yet you are able to get, some diagnosis done or some checkup done by the doctor remote as well. So telemedicine is going to be a very important area. But what I need to sort of point out here is that even via telemedicine, what you get prescribed is the brand that the pharma companies sell. So it doesn't cannibalize the pharmaceutical company's sales channel through doctors. It just complements that sales channel.
But as a theme, it's not part of our portfolio, right? The telemedicine as such, like it's...
No, there are no listed players in telemedicine, to be honest. There are only private equity players currently there, all private players.
The next question is, what's the investment horizon and allocation to this sector? I think...
okay.
Is it related?
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The investment horizon that you need to have here is a minimum 3 to 5 year horizon, minimum. That's because all the drivers that we spoke of, be it China being a new unbranded market, Ayushman Bharat for Indian market, API China plus one strategy or China diversification strategy for APIs, all of these are structural in nature changes, and structural changes don't happen overnight, right? So we need to give time to the industry to adopt these structural changes, for the government to act on it, for the patients and doctors to act on it, the hospitals to act on it. And that itself will take 3 to 5 years. So if you're coming into this product with an expectation in that in the next 6 months or 1 year, I'll make a quick 30% return, I would rather not encourage you to invest in this product. I need minimum 3 years to make this product work. I gave the example of DSP Healthcare Fund, where we launched in November 18, and in 1 year time, till November 19, it had a negative return of 5-6%. And then in the next 10 months, it gave you 82%. So, as fund managers, that is the toughest question that we get asked as to, next 6 months mein kya hoga ya 1 saal mein kya hoga. I'm sorry, there is no really good answer to that question. But yeah, this is a very valid question, that what is the time horizon? And time horizon should always be between 3 and 5 years. Anything less than that, honestly, we can't, guarantee you any good results or any good experience with us.
And the related question was allocation to this sector.
Yes. So look, if you're investing in multi-cap funds, diversified funds, you get 3 to 5 or 6% exposure to pharma, because that's the benchmark weight of pharma in your benchmark funds. To my mind, given that this is a sector where your country is globally competitive, remember, banks, autos, cement, wherever else your money is deployed, these are all protected sectors by the government regulations, and therefore you can't expect, or you should have that on the back of your mind, that there are policy changes here potentially that can happen, and if that happens, these sectors can really suffer with the hands of competition of their foreign counterparts. Pharma is a sector where you're globally competitive. Nobody even competes with you. Nobody even comes close. Everybody buys from you. Everybody sources from you. The COVID vaccine is a very good example to look at. We're selling to everybody in the world. Nobody is selling to us. Basically, this is a sector where your country is globally competitive. There is no regulation threat per se of any trade barrier getting removed, and therefore your local industry getting destroyed or anything like that. We are an open market. Everybody else is an open market. No trade barriers. So assuming all this, keeping all this in mind, and given the trajectory of improvement that I'm noticing in this business, I would encourage you to have about 15% of your portfolio allocated to pharma, dedicated. Now, out of that 15%, if you're getting 4, 5, 6% through your diversified fund allocation, the balance 10% should come in a pharma dedicated manner or a healthcare dedicated manner.
The next question is, the Indian pharma companies in the recent past were impacted by FDA observations, etc. Does this continue to be a major risk still?
Yeah. So I will take 2 minutes to answer this question, Radhika. I met a US FDA inspector back in 2014-15. Okay, and he had come to Mumbai. He was going to audit a plant near Mumbai. So I just caught him on his way to the airport to the hotel. So he gave me some 15 minutes. I asked him this question. I asked him, so when you come to Indian companies, why is it that you always find problems in Indian companies' plants? And he told me, Aditya, from my hotel, when I go to the plant to audit tomorrow, I will definitely travel 80 odd kilometers. There must be 30, 40 traffic signals that I will cross. I'm sure on each and every traffic signal that I cross, there will be somebody or the else breaking the traffic signal. Okay. So what I noticed, therefore, is, from what I conclude from that, is that, you guys don't basically respect laws. And this is your own country's law. So you're not respecting your own country's law. In the facility when I go, I know then, therefore, from this experience, I know that you're not following my rules also inside the facility. So my mindset has already changed from whether there is a problem to where is the problem, right? So I go in with a different mindset altogether. And therefore, there are always problems that I find, right? So my follow-up question to him was, so are our products therefore of bad quality because we don't follow the processes? They said, no, your product is the best quality product I could find in anywhere in the world, especially given the cost at which you manufacture it. So the idea is, the problem is not the quality of the product. The problem is that I tell you to follow steps A, B, C, D to get an outcome which is E, right? What I go to the plant and figure out is, you have done step A, B, and you have still achieved D. So he says, when you follow the process and get the outcome, it's a science. When you don't follow the process and still get the outcome, it's an art. So he says, when I go to the Indian manufacturing plant, I find artists. I don't find scientists. So his problem is that, and that problem I don't think is going away, because that's a very engineered thing in our nature, right? Jugaad, that willfulness of improving on everything and not following a given line, right? So that's sort of something which is inbuilt into us. But I will point out to you guys that just try and think about it. It's very counterintuitive, extremely counterintuitive. All the large Indian pharma companies have had problems with US FDA. All the large of them, count them on your fingertips. All of them have had severe issues with US FDA. So if there are 7, 8 large pharma companies, all 7 or 8 of them have had problems with FDA. But out of the 50 odd small pharma companies, only 4 or 5 have had problems with FDA. Very counterintuitive. No, those who are large have more money. They can do more things and ensure they don't get into problems, but they get into problems. Those who are small don't have enough money, yet they don't get into problems. So the answer to that is that when you have very large facilities, very complicated products, complex chemistry, too many laborers in the plant, too many supervisors doing here and there, the scope for making error just goes up. And when you are a small setup, the scope for making error is just lower, right? So to my mind, that is the reason why larger pharma companies have more problems, and they may continue to face such problems. So which is why, again, in our portfolio, because we keep a lower weight to the larger pharma companies, we are relatively more insulated to these FDA problems.
That was a brilliant answer, Aditya. Interesting insights.
Sure.
The next question is, how are corporate governance standards in pharma companies?
So look, there is no blanket answer to this. Corporate governance is a very company-specific issue. So there are companies in pharma that have corporate governance challenges. There are companies in pharma which don't have corporate governance challenges, much like any other industry. So yeah, I mean, there are a few bad apples, but rest assured, given our background, the way we work, the way we do our research, we work really hard on our forensic audit of these companies. I've worked at Ambit for 2 years, and I've learned forensic research there itself. I've worked at Lehman for 1 year. We learned forensic there as well. So I have good enough background in that area, and we try to make sure that we don't fall into any traps. So yeah, there are a few bad apples, but we always steer clear of those bad apples.
Great, thanks, Aditya. One question that's come in is also India depends on China for API and intermediaries. In fact, 70% of world requirement comes from China. But the world has realized that China cannot be depended on after COVID, its aggressive geopolitical process, etc. What is India planning to do to increase API intermediates?
Yeah. So I partly addressed this question during my opening remarks, where I said that, look, companies like Divi's is spending as much in capex in 2 years as they had spent in the last 35 years. So we are creating capacity, period. I mean, we know that the demand is coming to us. We know that even we don't want to rely on China anymore in the significant way that we were relying historically. And many big pharma companies based out of Europe, Japan, US also don't want to rely on China the way they were relying earlier. And we need capacities to address that problem, and we are doing that. So every API company that you can think of has embarked on a very large API manufacturing capacity expansion program. And that is just the way to address the problem. To add to that, the government has given this production-linked incentive schemes where they'll help you to break even sooner than normal by giving you an incentives in the early part of your journey. And then later, when you are profitable and scalable, then then you are on your own. So I think it's the first time I'm seeing that industry and government are on the same page in pharma, at least, where the industry is doing capex and the government is helping them in some way, which is very encouraging to see, to be honest. And I'm told there are more PLI schemes in pharma coming, yet to be enacted, but they are in the works.
Thank you, Aditya. The next question is, what's the future of contract manufacturing in India in times to come, and how much does the small enterprise contribute to the growth of the sector?
No, so contract manufacturing is an extremely lucrative business for Indian companies already. Okay, and with this China plus one strategy spilling from API to even contract manufacturing, it will become even a more lucrative industry. Divi's is again a contract manufacturer. We took the example of Divi's already. It is a contract manufacturer, and therefore you can see the kind of demand that a company like that is facing. So I don't have any doubt in my mind that this industry is going to be very, very large in the next 10 years for Indian companies. And I won't be surprised if we see more and more companies emerge into this space or try to enter this space, because the space is so lucrative today. And therefore, I am very optimistic about this industry overall. In terms of small companies, so if you are a contract manufacturer, you want to compete with a Divi's, you need to carve out a niche for yourself. You cannot compete with Divi's head on. You can't beat Divi's at its game, given their scale. So you need to find an area or a niche or a pocket where Divi's isn't present or isn't planning to get into, and you need to operate in that niche or that area. So I think contract manufacturing is a very, very bright future over the next decade in India, and there will be new companies emerging in that area. Obviously, some of them have already started scaling up significantly, and we will see some very, very interesting companies emerging in that space.
Interesting. The next question is, how about MNC Pharma?
Yeah, so MNC pharma companies are like that 100% FMCG business. They don't do any exports, or some of them do some exports, but not any material number of exports. So I like FMCG. I like FMCG. I like MNC pharma companies. The only thing that holds me back there is the valuation sometimes tend to go crazy. So we have a very, so we want to buy great businesses, but we want to buy great businesses at fair value, not above fair value, because end of the day, we are in the business of generating returns. And if you're buying something above fair value, then you'll probably not end up making any significant return for your shareholder, and which is something we want to avoid. So, if any MNC pharma company trades at a fair value, in my assessment, I'm more than happy to. But if it is trading above fair value or significantly above fair value, I would like to avoid.
Yeah, the next question is, sorry, just a minute. I think we covered that. If horizon is 3 years, then what will be the ROI? A little more direct question.
It's the same question I said. So we expect mid to high teen earning growth, CAGR for our portfolio, and your return expectation should be in line with that. Both these expectations do not assume any re-rating of the sector further. If that happens, that's over and above.
The next question is, if we invest in a sectoral fund, don't you think the risk is higher and hence the return expectation should be higher than teens?
Sure. So look, return and risk should be proportionate at some level. I agree with that. But I disagree with the fact that just because it's a sectoral fund, it is more risky. Because a sectoral infra fund would probably be far more risky than a sectoral pharma fund. You have to look at the fundamentals of the business you're investing in, sector or no sector. The fundamental of the business that we are presenting here is a more FMCG nature business, right? Our portfolio is also designed that way, where we are extremely bullish on the FMCG piece, and our 50% of our portfolio is basically made up of companies which are, which the lion's share of cash flows of those companies comes from the FMCG business, which is the Indian branded generic business. So you're not taking much risk, to be honest, in terms of the business model that you're betting on. And therefore, your return expectation should be in line.
What is the minimum ticket size for investment PMS? It is 50 lakhs. I believe we can't answer that. Are you aiming at returning the money post 3 to 5 years once the theme plays out?
I'll return the money when the sector trades at 100% premium to the broader market and at 25% return on equity overall. That's when we can return the money. Or the other thing we can do is, so that's a very interesting question. So I'll give you an example. People feel the entire sector is cyclical. No, it's not. And let me show you examples. So, pharma gave great returns between 2009 and 15, and between 2015 and 19, a lot of pharma stocks fell. But people thought every pharma stock fell. That is just not true. Most stocks fell because most stocks had that US business as a lion's share of their business, and the US business suffered, which is why those stocks fell. But if you look at companies like, for instance, Sanofi India, this is the market cap from 2008 to 18. Where is the cyclicality? Just isn't there, right? This is Divi's from 2008 to 18. Where is the cyclicality? Just isn't there, right? So if you choose the right stocks, so when the US business starts to peak out, right, you take out money from that business and you put it in the secular business of FMCG. Na? Why should we need to invest in the US sector at all times? We don't need to invest in that sector at all times. Currently, we are investing in that sector only because the sector is showing signs of bottoming out and recovering from the bottom. But when that piece, the unbranded piece, actually peaks out, you can take out money from there and put it in the other healthcare and pharma piece where there is no cyclicality. People always think of pharma as cyclical because that has been their experience. It has been cyclical from 9 to 15 and 16 to 19. But that was the case because most companies got most of their cash flow from US. Today, that is no longer the case. So you will not have a cyclicality going forward as well. Some of these companies will continue to be cyclical because they continue to invest in US. But others who don't invest in US or are not investing meaningfully in US will not have any cyclicality whatsoever.
That answers, Aditya. Thank you. The next question is, how is this PMS different from DSP, Nippon mutual funds?
So I have to talk about my competitors. That is something I've always avoided. Look, our PMS will invest 70% in small and mid caps. More than that, 75-ish in small and mid caps, where 70, 80, 90% of the cash flow of these companies will come from either contract manufacturing or branded generics like the FMCG type business. The rest, I will leave you to open up the Nippon and DSP portfolio and see what is their market cap mix, and therefore judge what is the percentage of their portfolio cash flow coming from the metal type business like US business, and what is the balance coming from the branded business. And you can judge it very easily. You can judge it just by market capitalization. All the large market caps have higher cash flow coming from US. All the small and mid caps have higher cash flow coming from India, right? So if you just do that exercise on your own, you will have your answer.
The next question is, do you see any headwinds in the sector from a weaker dollar in the medium term future?
So the weaker dollar again impacts the US business, and that is definitely a potential risk for that part of the business. But look, a weaker dollar also means lower import cost for the raw material that we import, or for and we do a cost plus. So Indian pharma companies in US basically price products on a cost plus basis. So if the dollar weakens, the customers have to pay a higher dollar price. So I don't think it's a material risk, but it's a risk which can play out for a quarter or two, and then the prices will go up and compensate for it. So again, as I said, that business, the US business, which everybody else keeps talking about and keeps investing in pharma, it is scary with the kind of vulnerability it has, with the kind of moving parts it has. Okay, so which is why I'm saying that business is recovering and we will invest in that, but that's only 20% of my portfolio. The balance 50% of my portfolio is branded generic. There is 20% in contract manufacturing, and then there is another 10-15% in hospital and diagnostics. So I am just taking a very measured small bet in that segment. Every other fund will have 40, 50, 70% in that segment. And that is what really scares me, because there are multiple number of factors that can influence that piece of business. And all these are potential risks. So I really don't know what you can do if you're invested in those funds.
Thank you, Aditya. The next question is, are there any specific type of APIs which will be or should get benefited from manufacturing in India while looking at the next 5 years, or any specific type of APIs which Indian government should be promoting in the coming future?
So currently the Indian government has taken the approach of promoting those APIs where China is almost a monopoly, which I think is a good idea, because the customers of those APIs also want an alternate source, right? So if you're trying to break their monopoly and the customer is willing to buy from another supplier, then obviously it is sort of win-win for both situations, right? So yeah, I mean, for many APIs where China has a monopoly, Indian companies are creating capacity for those products, and government has given the production linked incentive for those products, fermentation based APIs, some of these very commodity APIs, and that is where Indian companies are creating capacity. So yes, there are a bunch of products which will benefit from the PLI scheme, and will create higher ROE in the near future. And those APIs will do better. But there are certain other APIs which require such complex chemistry that the Chinese are not able to do it, because in those APIs there is no benefit of scale. And if there is no benefit of scale, then China isn't really good at it, right? Then we are better at it. So yeah, so two extremes. One extreme is the really commoditized API where China has a monopoly, we are trying to break it. That will be lucrative. The other extreme is this complex API with multiple sophisticated chemistry to it, where China isn't really capable, and therefore we will anyways do good at it. So on both these extremes, we'll do well. In between, we and China will share, market share.
I think this is probably the last question. Would a pharma mutual fund have some constraints which a PMS won't have to generate better returns? So I think you can just touch upon basic differences and benefits of a PMS versus a mutual fund.
No, I think I'll give a very coded answer to this. I think the constraint these pharma mutual funds have is liquidity. I doubt I am the expert in the sector. I doubt I am thinking or saying something which my peers in the sector don't know. In fact, I'm sure they know it. The problem is they can't implement it because they have 4,000-5,000 crores to manage. They can't buy these stocks. They buy these stocks, they buy 0.5% of their portfolio. Let's say the stock quadruples. What difference does it make to their portfolio returns? In my portfolio, I can buy the stock for 5, 6, 7% weight. And then if the stock quadruples, it makes a difference. Right. It happened to DSP Healthcare Fund. We had IPCA there. When we bought IPCA there, it was a 6,000 crore market cap company, very small company. But we could buy 10% of the fund. right? And when that stock quadrupled from 600 to 2000, the DSP Healthcare Fund created alpha, which our competitors could not. But today, even that fund is like more than 1,000 crores. So when I was managing it, it was like 300-400 crores. So much easier, much simpler times. But today, even that fund has crossed 1,000 crores.
Okay. I think yes. Thank you. I think that's all the questions that we had. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us, and I hope all of you will be in touch with your relationship managers, and we will see a lot of mobilization in our PMS product. Thank you so much, Aditya, for your time. Any closing remarks from you?
No, so I think the only thing I'll say is that when you look at this sector, please do not think of it as a tactical bet. Do not invest for 6 months, 1 year. Doesn't work. Hopefully, I mean, I hope it works for 6 months and 1 year as well, but I will definitely not encourage you to look at it from that perspective. And do not think of the sector as cyclical. Pharma is the least cyclical sector in the world. Zero sensitivity to anything. Interest rate, inflation, economic growth, nothing matters to pharma. It is the most secular sector in the world. People think FMCG is more secular. If you had the choice of buying atta and a life-saving drug, and you had only that much money in your pocket, ask yourself what will you buy, and you will get the answer whether FMCG is more cyclical or pharma. Okay, it has been cyclical in the past because the pharma companies have been focused on the wrong pocket, and fund managers have been focused on the wrong pocket. But hopefully that correction is being made, is underway, and it will no longer be, the same as it has been in the past.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.